Minoria is the latest game by Bombservice, the developers of the Momodora series. These titles are 2D Metroidvanias with a strong focus on combat. Minoria features fun and fast 2D fighting, a decent sized map with a lot of hidden secrets, a host of boss encounters, and sexy nuns. Minoria follows the story of Sister Semillia and Sister Fran, warrior nuns on a witch hunt. Your main goal is to stop whatever scheme the witches have brewing and protect Princess Amelia and her massive titties. Visually, Minoria is decent. The art style took a bit for me to get used to, and the best way I can describe it is horny. Sister Semillia is obviously designed to be sexy. Just look at her outfit. Her legs are exposed, and sometimes I swear I can see those cheeks. There is a bad scene with Semillia and Fran. Also, whatever the fuck is going on with Amelia's boobs, just bouncing and jiggling all the time. Big titty bosses, sexy nuns, sexy witches, sexy bitches all over the place. Outside of the horniness, Minoria is a pretty game with an anime-inspired look with a few areas that show it off quite well. I think there could be more variety in terms of environments and enemies. You spend a lot of time inside of a castle, and nearly all the areas look similar, but with a different color filter over them. And you'll see a lot of repeated enemies throughout the game. Which is funny because it feels like the faces of the main characters are repeated as well. The first 5 characters you meet all look similar except for slightly different hair and boobs. The last thing I want to touch on is the areas where the presentation affects gameplay. Minoria does this odd thing where they'll have a big flashy indicator that just indicates that an enemy is going to start attacking. Instead of just having this visual ring be for each individual attack, it is just to say hello, this thing here is going to attack soon. I might be wrong, but I think they did this because a majority of enemies only attack one strike at a time. So when an enemy attacked in combination, it usually caught me off guard. I still think they could get rid of this because the animation for attacks is clear enough on its own. This just adds noise to the visuals and sometimes things just feel messy and unclear. But there are positives to the presentation, such as giving attacks a solid impact. Things like the little pause that occurs after you defeat an enemy never gets old, and it makes the attack feel like it hit that much harder. The sound effect for counters as well as the visual makes pulling them off feel intensely satisfying. Minoria succeeds when it uses its visuals to enhance the feel of combat. And I guess now is the best time to discuss combat. Fighting is basic and enjoyable. There aren't a lot of special moves you'll have to learn, and the only combo is done by spamming the attack button. They do allow combos to continue after a dodge, which is nice. There is some variety in combat because of the instances, which are magical abilities that vary from healing to damage dealing spells, which can be basic shit like a projectile, or lightning to smite your enemies. You find more by exploring or buying them with items found by exploring. Some can be unlocked by defeating a boss without taking a hit, so it gives an additional level of challenge to those fights. The instances aren't all active, some are passive buffs to Semillia. The basic attacks and instances make up your offensive options. You'll find a few new weapons and unlock a charge attack, a double jump attack, and a dash attack. The last one is mostly used for platforming. The new weapons don't feel all that different from each other, so I just ended up sticking to one for most of the game. The way that they are differentiated is through slightly different combos and charged attacks. And most enemies die within the combo, so even if they do different damage, it becomes a moot point. Also, most of the combos are the same, and there are only 2 charge attacks in the game. So there's a lot of overlap between the different weapons. Defensively, you have few choices: a basic dodge, a counter, and just getting the fuck out of the way. The counter has got to be the most overpowered move in the game. You can counter almost any attack, and this counter does an insane amount of damage, which can kill or nearly kill everyone. But that's not all, folks, because they felt the need to make it even more powerful by having it damage enemies near the one you countered. It surprisingly works on things I didn't think it would, such as ranged attacks and bombs. And when you counter a ranged attack, it teleports you to the enemy's location. So being passive and waiting for a counter isn't just a valid option, it's one of the most powerful ones. I still had fun with the combat, but the lack of depth hurts its overall enjoyment. There are basically two strategies: run in and rush the enemies down, or wait on a counter and kill them that way. It becomes a bit mindless when you don't have to really focus on what the enemies are doing, because every single foe can be dealt with in the same manner. The only enemies I had to fight differently were the ones with shields, which just meant that I had to use the countering strategy instead of the bum rush one. Overall, the combat does just enough that I don't hate it, but lacks depth and complexity, which can also be said of the world design. Minoria doesn't really try to get you lost, as the way forward is usually obvious. It is a fairly linear game, which is odd for this genre where many games such as Hollow Knight try to make sure you really understand the world and how to get around, and the way forward isn't always clear. I personally find getting lost to be a bit boring and frustrating, so this actually became a positive for me. The best way to know where to go is to say, where can I go? Because you will find yourself in many situations where the multiple routes are all blocked off except for one, and that is where you have to go next. Or if multiple routes are viable, it's because you have to complete some challenge for all those routes before progressing. So the world isn't really taxing or interesting to explore, it's always following the path. The platforming feels fun, but the devs don't really do anything to challenge you in this regard. The world ends up being nothing more than a commute between different combat encounters. I really wish they added a sprint or some option to move faster, because doing this shit everywhere is annoying. Eventually the whole map will be available to explore freely, but by that time you're almost done with the game. It also doesn't help that the final area is only connected to the previous ones through one entrance. Also, there is no fast travel until you finish the game. I should bring attention to some of the other issues Minoria has. Minoria is a short game that takes around 5 or so hours to complete, depending on how much you decide to explore. That isn't a flaw in itself, because I prefer those types of games. It's just that there is too much time following the lone path before the game gives you any freedom to explore. And because of some of the issues discussed in the combat section, there aren't many worthwhile things to find. Some instances are, but many are just meh, and you'll find a shitload of silver coins that you might never use because the only thing they can be used on are incenses. So the joy of finding the secret is lessened when all it contains is a silver coin that won't be used. I do enjoy the combat, but there is one issue that really shouldn't be in the game. Sometimes when you counter, you'll still take damage. This is a rare occurrence, but when the literal fucking tutorial states that countering negates damage, you can't then have the game damage you while countering successfully. I do not care if it's rare. If it happens once, it's a problem. But if it happens twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 or 6 or more, that's just fucking terrible. It either shouldn't damage you or it shouldn't trigger the counterattack. It can't do both. It just shows that there's still polish that needs to be done with the mechanics that are here. I'll put a spoiler warning here. If you don't want to see any of the bosses or have the story spoiled for you, skip to the timestamp in the description. The bosses are a bit too easy to learn. Every boss has a small moveset that can be understood fairly quickly. They aren't that difficult to defeat, as I beat most of them on my first try. But this could be because of the amount of healing you have. By the end of the game, you'll be going into boss battles with about 10 healing instances, which is a lot. And that makes your mistakes have a very little impact when they can be easily reversed. I think this is why they give special rewards for killing them without taking a hit, as that is a real challenge and test of skill. There really isn't much to say about them. They're just entertaining little bumps of challenge that don't go high enough to be noticeable. The bosses do the same thing the rest of the game does. It has just enough to make you pay attention, but doesn't demand much of you. It's just enough to be around here on the flowchart, which leaves it feeling like mindless fun, but not much more. I don't feel like discussing the story. All you need to know is the game has 2 endings. One where the princess stabs a bitch, and the other is where you say no, don't stab that bitch, and she stabs the bitch, and then stabs your friend, and then you stab her. But you don't kill her, because that wouldn't be nice. Religious organizations that use religion to justify violence aren't good, Who knew? Also, anime nuns and witches are sexy. That's all the story you need to know. Minoria is an enjoyable game that doesn't live up to its full potential. There needs to be more here. More worthwhile exploration, more variety in combat, and more sexy nuns. Maybe wait for a sale, because I did have a good time playing through it multiple times, but compared to other games in this genre, it lags behind. It's just a flat out competent game. I'm a fan of Bombservice and this is their best work yet. I hope that one day they reach their full potential, cause I know they can make something special. But until then, their latest work is worth a look if what I said sounds interesting. That's all for me. See you all in the next video. Might be something weird. Please like and subscribe and share with your friends and enemies and sexy nuns that you know. Thank you, goodbye.